What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into another Bracketology update where we're going to be looking at the latest Joe Lenardi Bracketology that he released. We're going to be looking at the bracket watch, who's on the bubble, and who's the risers and fallers, just a week away from finding out who's going to be in the March Madness field. And then after that, we're going to fill out a bracket ourselves. So let's get right into it. Looking at the bracket watch, the top overall seed is still the same. Out of the Big Ten is the Purdue Boilermakers. First team out is St. John's. Now, if St. John's get into the tournament, I think that they would be a scary 11 seed, which they would probably likely get in. They're on a 3-game winning streak, coming off of a big win against DePaul. They finished off their season against Georgetown, and then they're going to be shifting their attention to the Big East tournament. So I think that St. John's, if they win one or two games in the Big East tournament, make a deep run with Rick Pitino's squad, I think that St. John's would be a really popular upset as a play-in. The last team in is Wake Forest. Wake Forest, though, on the other hand, is on not looking too good coming off of that loss against Georgia Tech. So Wake Forest might be playing their way outside of the tournament. Like St. John's, they might need a run in the ACC tournament to keep their hopes alive. So that's the top overall seed, first team out and last team in. Now let's go on to the bubbles. So the last four byes are Colorado State, Florida Atlantic, Villanova, and TCU. So all four of those teams would avoid the play-in. Though the last four in, these would be the teams in the play-in. That would be Seton Hall, New Mexico, Virginia, and Wake Forest. So you see two ACC schools there on the last four in. First four out are St. John's, Utah, Providence, and Iowa. Then the next four out, these teams would likely have to make a deep run, potentially even win their conference championship to make it into the field of 68. That is Colorado, Pittsburgh, Drake, and Memphis. So looking at the play-in, it would be Norfolk State and Central Connecticut State. Central Connecticut State is the new team into the bracket. That would be the first of two matchups in the 16 seed. The next 16 seed matchup would be Arkansas Little Rock and Grambling. That would be automatic qualifiers. And the 11 seeds would be New Mexico, Wake Forest. As you see there, Wake Forest is moving down. New Mexico has stayed put. So that would be your first of the 11 seeds in the play-in. Your next one would be Seton Hall, which is moving down in Virginia out of the ACC. So those would be your four play-in games to get into that field of 64. Now let's go on to the risers and fallers. First with the Midwest, like I mentioned, Central Connecticut State is a new team in the field. Mississippi State, with the loss against Texas A&M, they dropped to number 9. Clemson is also dropped down to a 5 seed. Appalachian State, they were a 12 seed last week when we looked at this. They're now a 13 out of the Sun Belt. Oakland moving up to a 14. Dayton and Oklahoma moving down. Dayton would be a 7 seed. Oklahoma would be a 10 seed. And then new to the field is Sam Houston State. They would be an automatic qualifier. Let's go on now to the West. Nevada moves up to an 8 out of the Mountain West. Florida, they're looking really good, coming off of a big victory against Alabama at home in a high-scoring shootout. They would be a 6 seed, like I mentioned before. Wake Forest is an 11 seed. They would be in the play-in against New Mexico. And that is it for the West. Now let's go on to the South, where we have Colorado State out of the Mountain West. They move down to a 9 seed. Auburn moves down to a 5 seed. Utah State up to a 6. Duke, it's also up to a 3. The Blue Devils are trending in the right direction. TCU down to an 8. We saw them being a 9 in last week's bracketology. And then Quinnipiac, they would be the 15 seed in the South region. Finally, let's go on now to the East region. Eastern Kentucky moves up to a 16. Princeton is new to the field. It was Cornell, but it looks like Joe Lunardi has shifted his attention for Princeton being the conference champion out of the Ivy League. Alabama, after the loss against Florida, moves down to 4. South Carolina, after a huge win this week, coming off of a tough loss last night against Tennessee, but South Carolina moves up to 6. Seton Hall down to 11. They find themselves in the play-in. Vermont down to a 14. Gonzaga and Villanova new to the field. Gonzaga last week, they were on the bubble. Villanova was also on the outside looking in. So we see both Gonzaga and Villanova move safely into the field at 7 and the 10. So those are your risers and fallers. Now let's go ahead and shift our attention towards making some picks. So we're going to be filling out this. We're going to be doing this at least one more time next Thursday before the actual field of 68 is released on Sunday, March 17th. We're definitely going to be looking forward to that one. So let's go ahead and make our predictions. Starting off in the top left portion of the bracket, we have number 1 seed Purdue, Norfolk State, and Central Connecticut State. I think that Norfolk State would win that 16 versus 16 seed matchup to get into the field of 68. We saw. I think that the narrative, we all know it is that Purdue in the past couple of years has they're really kryptonite has been the double-digit seeds, but I don't see it here. I think that the Boilermakers would chug along to the second round. Next one, we have our first 8 and 9, Texas and Mississippi State. Both of these teams are pretty even. There definitely been a lot of ups and downs with the Longhorns and Bulldogs, but I am going to go with Texas. I think that the edge to them out. Mississippi State definitely plays a really good defense, but I think that Texas would get the job done here and move to the round of 32. We have our first 5-12 matchup. 5-12 upsets are definitely spicy. We have Clemson and Richmond, but I'm going to go with Clemson. Though I think that Richmond, if they get the right draw, I think that they could definitely make some noise in March. 4 seed Kentucky, 13 App State. I love App State, but I hate this matchup. I think that the one thing that knocks Kentucky is that their defense has definitely been poor. Their offense, though, I mean, they've been shooting the lights out of everybody. I feel like every game so far in the past couple of weeks that they have definitely put up 100 points. So I think that the offense alone, but I think that that defense would definitely be one of the key areas where I definitely have some question marks about Kentucky heading into this tournament. 6 seed Wisconsin, 11 seed South Florida. I've definitely been a fan of South Florida. They're one of the hottest teams in the country right now. So you got to go with at least one 11/6. I feel like the 11/6 happen pretty much every year, so you got to pick at least one. So I'm going to go with the hottest team in the land out of the American with South Florida. 3 and the 14 matchup in this region is Baylor and Oakland. I think that the Baylor Bears had a scare against Texas. Texas had that big lead, but Baylor was able to respond quite well to get that huge victory at home. 7 and the 10. These are two teams that I don't really have too much faith in to make a deep run. But I am going to go with the Dayton Flyers to move on this one. So I'm going to go with chalk on that matchup. Marquette, Sam Houston, the 2 and the 15. I'm going to go with Marquette to round out the first round on that one. So let's go ahead and stick it with this region. We'll go ahead and fill it out. Number 1 seed Purdue, 8 seed Texas. I think that there's going to be at least one 8/1 upset here. But I'm going to go with Purdue continuing on their magical run. 5 seed Clemson, 4 seed Kentucky. I think that this would definitely be a great matchup, but I'm going to lean towards picking Kentucky once again to move on to the Sweet 16. 11 seed USF, number 3 Baylor. I think that this would be a great game. Like I mentioned, South Florida carrying that momentum into March. We'll see if they can run the table and win the American Athletic Conference Championship. But I'm going to go with Baylor. This is a deep Baylor team. I think that they could definitely make a run. Number 7 seed Dayton taking on number 2 seed Marquette. I had Marquette, with Kolek out of the past game, last night against UConn. He's going to be out at least one more game, so we'll see. Have to monitor the injury to Kolek. But Marquette coming off that loss last night against UConn at home, so I am going to go with Marquette to continue on. Let's go on now to the 1 versus the 4 with 1 seed Purdue, 4 seed Kentucky. I'm actually going to pull off the upset here. I feel like there's got to be some upsets. I just don't really see all 1 seeds getting into the Final Four. So I am going to go with Kentucky and that high-powered offense to get it done and go to the Elite 8. Let's go on now with Baylor and Marquette. I'm actually going to go with Baylor. I think that Baylor is starting to hit their strides at the right time. So give me Baylor to move on. So we have a 4 and a 3. And give me the Baylor Bears to move on to the Final Four. I think that they're really catching fire. Scott Drew is definitely starting to figure out. I think that, like I mentioned, this is definitely a deep team that can make some noise. So we have at least one Big 12 team making it into the Final Four. So let's go on now to the bottom left portion of the bracket where we have number 1 seed being Arizona. Face off against Little Rock and Grambling. Give me Grambling in that matchup, but I am going to go with Arizona. The Wildcats are definitely starting to hit their stride at the right time. 8 seed Nevada, 9 seed Michigan State. These are two experienced teams, but I am going to go with Michigan State. I feel like every year I don't pick Michigan State. They just win. I mean, Tom Izzo, you got to pick them in March. It feels like every time they get at least one win, if not 2 or 3 wins. So Michigan State could be one of those 8-9 seeds that could really make a magical run here. 5 seed BYU, 12 seed Grand Canyon. I like Grand Canyon as a 12, but I hate this matchup. Definitely been a fan of BYU. They are coming off of a tough road loss against Iowa State. Iowa State is in this bracket too, so we'll get to them in a moment. But I think that BYU Could be one of those sneaky 5 teams that can make a deep run. 4 seed Illinois, 13 seed Sanford. I think that Illinois definitely wins this game and beats Sanford. 6 seed Florida, 11 seed New Mexico, and Wake. I would take Wake Forest in that one if they were in this tournament. I just don't think that they're going to be in, especially after that loss against Georgia Tech. I think that Florida moves on here. Florida is definitely playing some great basketball down the stretch. Todd Golden has really changed that program fast. So number 3, Creighton, 14 seed High Point. I think that High Point is one of those teams that can definitely give a scare to a 3, but I don't see it here with Creighton. They're definitely loaded. Number 7 seed Boise State, 10 seed FAU. I am once again going to go with a 10 seed upset here, if you want to call it. I am going to go with Florida Atlantic. They made a deep run last year. They've been a little bit inconsistent throughout this season, but maybe there's a little bit of magic from last year's run still left to play with the Owls. Number 2, Iowa State, 15 seed Eastern Washington. I think that Iowa State gets the job done here, and we see Big 12 representing in this region. 1 seed Arizona, 9 seed Michigan State. I think that Tom Izzo's bunch would give them a scare, but I am going to go with Arizona. Arizona definitely with Caleb Love leading the way. I think that with experience that he had in North Carolina helps, especially at the point guard position. So give me Arizona to move on. BYU and Illinois, give me BYU to move on to this one. I think that this would be a really good matchup, but I am going to go with BYU. 6 seed Florida, 3 seed Creighton. We saw the same matchup. I think that this would be close. I love Florida if there were anywhere else. But I am going to go with Creighton to move on to the next round. 10 seed FAU, 2 seed Iowa State. I think that Iowa State's defense would be too much in this one. So give me the Clones to move on to that one. 1 seed Arizona, 5 seed BYU. I am going to go with Arizona. I think that BYU's season ends right there. And then we have 3 seed Creighton, 2 seed Iowa State. I'm going to go with Creighton there, with the Blue Jays to move on to the Elite Eight. And we have a fantastic matchup. I'm definitely high on both of these teams, Arizona and Creighton. But give me another 1 seed falling here. I'm going to go with Creighton moving on to the Final Four. So we have 2, 3 seeds already. So let's now go ahead and fill out the right portion of the bracket to the top right, where that we have UConn, the defending national champs, facing off against 16 seed Eastern Kentucky. UConn is a scary team. They're definitely going to be one of the favorites to repeat. I mean, they're definitely looking unbeatable right now. We'll see if anybody can do it in this field of 68. Texas Tech and Nebraska in the 8 and the 9. You know what? Just for rooting purposes, I'm going to root for Nebraska to get their first tournament victory. Feels like in a very long time. So I'm going to go with Nebraska. I know that there's that narrative out there that the Big Ten doesn't perform well in March. So we'll see if they can change that narrative this season. 5 seed Washington State, 12 seed Princeton. Princeton, I feel like every time that they get into the tournament, they always pull off an upset. But, man, I just can't pick against Washington State right now. So I'm going to go with Wazoo to pull off this one against Princeton. So give me Washington State to move on to the round of 32. Alabama and UC Irvine. Alabama, if they're on it on the three-pointers, they can pretty much beat anybody. But if they're not, they're pretty beatable. Do I want to pull the 13-04 upset? You know, let's have a little bit of fun. I'm going to have UC Irvine, the Anteaters, pulling off the upset against Alabama to move on. 6 seed South Carolina, 11 seed Seton Hall in Virginia. I feel like there's always that 11 seed, especially out of the play-in, that makes it a run. I would go with Virginia in that matchup, but give me South Carolina to pull that one off. I think that South Carolina definitely playing well as of late. 3 seed Kansas, 14 seed Vermont. Vermont's definitely one of those teams as well that could prevent a scare there, but I'm going to go with the Jayhawks moving on. 7 seed Gonzaga, 10 seed Villanova. If you haven't watched Gonzaga lately, they are definitely catching my eye at least. I think that they're flying under the radar. Usually Gonzaga's either like a top 3 seed, but I think that Mark Few's squad likes it here, being that 7th seed. They're definitely going to be one of my picks to go far in this tournament. We'll see how far I pick them to go. 2 seed North Carolina against the Fighting Toothpicks of Colgate. I am going to go with North Carolina. I think that the Tar Heels survived the scare there. Colgate feels like as well also that team that can provide a scare to one of these top teams. UConn, Nebraska. Nebraska run ends here. And then Washington State and UC Irvine. I'm going to go with Wazoo going on to the Sweet 16. I think that would be a fantastic turnaround for Washington State. So 6 seed South Carolina, 3 seed Kansas. Give me Kansas in that one to move on. And then 7 seed Gonzaga, 2 seed North Carolina. This is definitely tricky. Let's go ahead and get another upset. I'm going to go with the Gonzaga Bulldogs to move on to that one. They're definitely catching fire coming off of that big win over the weekend against St. Mary's. We'll see if they can win the West Coast Conference Tournament whenever it kicks off this upcoming week. UConn and Wazoo in the 1/5. We got to go with UConn here. Fantastic story for Washington State ends there. 3 seed Kansas, 7 seed Gonzaga. I am going to go with the Jayhawks. Moving on there. I think that Gonzaga, he had a great run, but I think that the Kansas Jayhawks send them home. And then UConn and Kansas. I think that this is definitely one of the 1 seeds that I think could definitely go far, and that would be the UConn Huskies. One more portion of the bracket to fill out before we get on to the Final Four. Number 1 seed Houston, 16 seed South Dakota State. In their first year of the Big 12, Houston are the regular season champs in the Big 12, so congratulations to the Cougars. I think that they get the job done there. 8 seed Northwestern, 9 seed Colorado State. I'm going to go with another 9 here. I'm going to go with Colorado State over Northwestern in that matchup. 5 seed Auburn, 12 seed McNeese. I like both of these teams. I hate that I have to send one of those home, but I'm going to go with another upset. Go with the McNeese State Cowboys. They also clinched their regular season conference championship in the Southland tournament. We'll see if they can win that one and make it to the big dance. 4 seed San Diego State, 13 seed Charleston. Charleston was one of those dangerous teams last year that a lot of people were picking the upset. Don't see it with SDSU moving on to the next round. Utah State and Indiana State. We're going to have another 11 seed pulling off the upset, Indiana State. I think that this is going to be a popular pick too, especially with their guard play. Duke and Akron going to go with the Duke Blue Devils moving on to that one. They're looking really good down the stretch. They have a big game coming up against North Carolina on Saturday. 7 seed St. Mary's, 10 seed TCU. I'm going to go with TCU pulling off this 10/7 upset. And then finishing out this first round, I'm going to go with the Vols. Vols got a big win. Got a big win on Saturday against Alabama. And then during the midweek, they got one last night against South Carolina on the road. So Tennessee is looking like a real threat to not only make it to the Final Four, but potentially win the national championship this season. 1 seed Houston, 9 seed Colorado State. Going to go with Houston. Houston's definitely looking like a scary team. I feel like this team always make a run in March. 12 seed McNeese, 4 seed San Diego State. I think that McNeese's offense against San Diego State's defense, I think that defense prevails, giving the Aztecs once again to move on to the Sweet 16. 11 seed Indiana State, 3 seed Duke. Indiana State's run comes to a halt. I think that the Blue Devils continue their run. And then TCU, Tennessee would be a great matchup. 2 high-powered offenses, but I'm going to go with Dalton Knecht to win that one, and the Tennessee Vols moving on. Houston and San Diego State would also be a great matchup, but I'm going to go with Houston, move it on to that one. And then we have 3 seed Duke, 2 seed Tennessee. This would be a really tough matchup. I think potentially game of the tournament, but give me the Tennessee Volunteers to move on to that one. Houston and Tennessee. I feel like every year I don't have Houston making it to the Final Four, and they always do. So give me the Houston Cougars. I think that they're playing well down the stretch. So in recap, I have 2 3 seeds, 2 1 seeds, Baylor, Creighton, UConn, Houston. So let's go ahead and finish off this bracket. 3 seed Baylor, 3 seed Creighton. Give me Creighton in this one, and then UConn and Houston. Give me Houston to advance in this one. I feel like it's tough to pick against UConn, especially the way that they're playing. But I always like to go against not defending national champs. So I'm going to go with Houston. And then Creighton and Houston. Give me Houston in their first year in the Big 12 to cut down the nets in Phoenix, Arizona. So I have Houston win the national championship, had UConn winning it. I think that those are definitely my 2 top picks as of now. We'll see when the full bracket is released on Sunday, March 17th. So that's going to be it for this week's Bracketology. Stay tuned. Next week, we maybe have a double upload since Joe Lenardi is going to be putting out a Bracketology every single day leading up to Selection Sunday. So definitely exciting times if you're a college basketball fan. So that's going to be it for this week's bracketology, and we will see you all next week. Have a good one.